Hello, welcome to the Sound Talk podcast. I'm Stephen Kerrison and I run Tall Trees Audio Mastering here in Liverpool.
I'm also in Liverpool. I'm also called Stephen and I'm in what studio?
Sound Talk is a podcast where each episode we, the Stephens, which I'm on board with now, we'll be chatting to a special guest who we respect and admire about their journey into audio, their approach and working practices, and all things to do with sound. On today's show, we'll be speaking to the owner and operator of Bear Bites Horse Studio in London, Wayne Adams. Wayne has a long history in the London DIY scene, and the amount of records he's been part of as either a producer or engineer on the label that he co-runs, Hominid Sounds, or as a prolific musician himself is, quite frankly, mental. How are you doing this morning, Wayne?
Hi, guys. Lovely to see you all. Good morning. It's 9:30 a.m. Very early.
We've seen a lot of posh podcast mics over the last few weeks, and we're both just rocking SM58s. So
yeah, great, man. Exactly. And I've got a 40 quid kick drum mic, but it's supposed to be a great mic, and it's 40 quid. So you know,
what is that mic for the fans?
It's an SE X1D.
Interesting.
It was kind of one of the SE mics that was released. I don't know, maybe about 3 years ago when they relaunched kind of like their ribbon mics and stuff like that. And it's a large diaphragm condenser that's designed for bass cabs and kick drums. No one bought it. And now people are like, these mics are fucking amazing. You know, like one of those kind of jobs. And so, was just like hunting around to see if I could find one. And then I found two. And then because they're only 40 quid, I bought two. Because that's what you do, right?
Yeah. If you find the trick.
Exactly.
That one trick.
Because I record a lot of stuff live as well. So I was just like, well, it'd be useful to have two, because it's like one for the kick drum and one for a bass cab, maybe, if I like them that much. And if not, I'll just flog one. Right.
Or your double kickers, of course.
That is also true. Yeah, I do record a few of those, and I hate them. I hate them all. I hate them as much as recording hand claps and tambourine. No one can do double kick drum. Fucking no one.
Yeah, it's a difficult conversation there.
It is. I've got quite good at it though. It's just like, you can't do it. Stop. Yes, stop. And then you watch the drummer and he starts crying.
Do you have the conversation with them? Do you do it?
I do prior these days. I used to just kind of like, if I knew it was a metal band, just be like, I'll deal with that when they turn up, and you know, 6 months
of your life quantizing them.
Yeah, see what happens. But now it's like a question that I do in pre-production, you know, just when we're kind of negotiating the session and stuff like that, about like how much time we're going to have and all of that kind of business. Yeah, it's the first question I ask about drums. Have you got double kick? And if you have, we're going to add 2 days on to the session, basically, because it's like, it's going to take longer to record it and edit it. And so, yeah, you know, and you have to edit it before you can start recording shit as well. So,
do you have a process that you found is the best way, or do you have to do it differently for each client?
Yeah, really, that's kind of like, if I've worked with a drummer before, and if I've worked with a drummer, I tend to know their kind of nuances and the bits that they can do and can't do. So you can kind of deal with those discussions before you start tracking a song. Like, okay, you know, you're about to do a blast beat and the kick drum's going to go like, you know, do we keep it bolt thrower and just go, yeah, man, it's going to sound absolutely hectic if it's all out of time. You know, it will sound more metal. You know, that's my new thing. I'm like, it sounds more metal if you don't quantize it. You know, yes. That's the essence of metal.
That's child psychology, though.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's all got a bit lost, though. And, like, it's why I don't really listen to any contemporary metal music. It's just like programmed drums, quantized guitars, boring. You know what I mean? Like, really? Like,
yeah, I love the sound of those. Like, if you listen to that, like something like the live Slayer album, the first one, the Decade of Aggression. Yeah. And like, there's so much double kick in it, and none of it's in time. It just, you know, it's just galloping over itself, and it just sounds amazing.
Yeah, totally. You know, and it's got there's a rawness there that really just you know, I like metal that crosses over with punk. That's it. That's the sweet spot for me. Is when punk and metal collide. Is when you get good metal. because you need that kind of attitude. And so the moment that, you know, you've got a drummer that comes in, it's just like, oh, it was supposed to be this and it was supposed to be that. But it's like, but you can't play it. So, you know, like, what do we do about that? And then, you know, it can be really hard for a drummer to suddenly like have to deal with that. Like, oh shit, I wasn't as good as I thought I was. Or, you know, it doesn't sound like my sugar. And it's like, well, you know, that guy's a freak. Like, he's insane. You know, there's probably 10 people on the planet that can do it. But my approach to recording is that it's not my recording. It's a band's recording. You know, I'm helping them trying to get what they want out of it, you know. And so if a band does want that like machine gun double kick, you know, and they can't do it, I'm like, just don't play the kick drum and just play the cymbals and the snare and the toms, and I will just program it for you and it will sound how you want it to sound, you know, and we'll get through this a lot quicker and have more time to spend on, you know, the guitars and the bass and the vocals and, you know, everything else, you know, rather than spending a week on drums just for me to be quantizing it and reprogramming it, because that's essentially what they want. And there's this kind of I think there's a slight disconnect sometimes with some drummers about what drums actually sound like. You know, it's like, when has your drum kit ever sounded like exploding aerosol cans? It never has, but that's what you want it to sound like. You know, so if you want it to sound like that, then we use samples and triggers, and, you know, it's great when you get a drummer that's really in tune with that process and just like, right, I'm gonna lay this down how I think I can play it, and then we'll look at how to deal with it. And you're like, okay, great, you know, that's awesome, rather than having to go through the process of someone and be like, oh, you can't do it, I'm really sorry.
Do you get many drummers who sort of come in with that completely open-minded, like, right, I know that I'm not going to be able to do this live, and sort of talk to you about how
it's
to facilitate it?
It's rare, but you do find that they tend to be the ones that can almost do it though as well. It's that kind of weird thing where it's just like the ones that understand the process and what they're kind of after tend to be, I don't want to say better drummers, because that's just completely like pointless to say you're worse or better, because it doesn't really matter. But they tend to be the ones that have had a bit more experience, you know, with recording. And, you know, like, I find drummers that do a bit of recording themselves can be great, because they really understand like bleed and all of that kind of stuff, especially around toms. And drummers that kind of understand tom bleed and cymbals, they'll build their drum fills around what they're hitting and stuff like that, where you're like, oh, I'm not gonna be like smashing the hell out of this 24-inch ride cymbal that is 2 inches above my floor tom whilst I'm doing a floor roll, you know, like, because all it's gonna be is cymbal in that floor tom mic. You know. Yeah, right. And so, you know, like they will you often find that they'll write their drum parts for recording, because they're like, oh, this roll will sound amazing if there's no cymbals around it, because I'll really be able to turn it up.
What are you editing in? What is your DAW of choice?
I use Cubase, just because I've used it for a long time. And I think the couple of times that I've done, oh, maybe I should get Pro Tools, and, you know, obviously it's a bit of a standard. I talk to people now like, don't use Pro Tools. People are like, don't do it. It's so buggy now. It's a pain. And I've got to be honest, like, Cubase is pretty amazing for like drum editing these days. It's super quick. I don't know how Pro Tools works, but you can do the kind of like, you put it all into a folder, and it's kind of like you can set priority on transients within the whole group, and then you can just split on those kind of transients that are priority, quantize, crossfade, maintains all kind of phase relationship, like super quick. You know, you can get through a whole track, a very complicated track, maybe in 15 minutes, and get 90% of it. You know, it's really good. Yeah.
Nice. I think the Pro Tools thing is kind of like, because that's always the first thing everyone says when you mention Pro Tools. Oh, it's the, you know, it's the standard, it's the industry standard. It's like, well, if you're working in an independent capacity and you've got no kind of no desire to sort of start working remotely in studios, you don't need to know it. Like,
No,
I mean, it's industry standard, because if you want to get a job in a bigger studio, that's probably what they're going to be using or whatever. But like,
yeah, like it's never really bitten me in the ass. Now it's going to at some point in the next 6 months. I know it. I'm going to get offered that like big dream job that I need during lockdown. They're going, but you've got to do it in Pro Tools.
You got to invest.
Oh no, bollocks! Yeah, like
I'm not sure we've had a Pro Tools user on the podcast yet. Have we had one?
I don't think we have
I
actually.
don't think we have. No. I think the kind of people we're speaking to don't use Pro Tools. You know.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have moved away from it, and I definitely know some bigger engineers wish that they could move away from it. You know, I've definitely heard that. We're just like, you know, this thing doesn't. I think especially with Mac, it seems that especially with like all of the Mac updates, Pro Tools were just a bit slow to kind of, you know, get it up to speed, and so there was a lot of problems with people buying new machines and it not working, and you know, all of that kind of business that you stumble across. You know, I just went through a massive update on my computer, and you know, it's a stressful couple of days because you lose plugins. You're like, wow, okay, that plugin I've used for 20 years I now can no longer use, you know, and
breaks your heart.
Yeah, man. And then all of those projects that you're on, you're just like, right, I've got to go backwards and take those plugins out. And then, you know, 9 times out of 10, I don't even know what it was doing. It's just in there, just sitting in there, being a pain in the ass, making all my projects crash on my new machines. But yeah, you know, but it was, you know, I have 2 computers. I have one at my studio, one at home. I need them to have identical setups so I can just kind of, you know, work backwards and forwards. So whenever there's an update, there's 2 updates. I went from like Cubase 9 to Cubase 11 recently, and Cubase 11 doesn't work on the latest version of Windows. Cubase 11 needs the latest version of Windows 10, and Cubase 9 doesn't work on the latest version of Windows 10. So I had to do the update. I had no choice, and I hadn't updated my studio computer for 3 years, so I had to do 3 years of Windows updates. And I off my phone as well, because I don't have an internet connection at my studio. So just like burning through the G's on my phone. And just like, oh my God, this is going to be a nightmare. And it was like 2 days to get it all working again. And then, you know, I'm still just nervous when I hit record. I'm like, oh no, please don't crash. I go and work in a studio in Wales, but it runs a Mac with Pro Tools, so I always take my own computer, and I've been taking like a rack of stuff, but now I can just take this and just aid out the cards basically, which makes it really nice and easy, you know, just to kind of have my own, because I really like going to work in other studios, but I struggle with different monitors, so I always take my own monitors, and I always just take my own computer, because a lot of the time, you know, I mix whilst I record. That's my vibe, you know. I'm like, okay, we'll record for 6 hours. Now I want a couple of hours mixing. So tomorrow I kind of know where we're at. And I find that after 6 hours, most bands are done. You know, they've left the room. You know, they're on the beers, and it's just like, yeah, man, you know, go to the pub, go have a nice time. I'll catch you in the morning. Everything will be sounding a bit, you know, sharper and stuff like that. So even when I'm working like in a residential or something like that, I like to grab that time just to mix. And, you know, the studio I use in Wales, you know, it's got big, like, in-wall ATCs and NS10s. And I hate mixing on both of those. I can't mix on ATCs. Like, I'm just like, everything sounds amazing. And it's just like, I have no idea what's going on. You know, I can hear everything crystal clear, but I couldn't tell you if the mix was good. And then NS10s, I don't get excited when I'm mixing on them. And I want to be excited, you know. I'm like, I love the studio that I go to, but I'm just like, come on, man, just buy a pair of I don't know, like $2,000, you know, midfields or something like that. It'd be perfect. It'd be fine.
So what do you bring?
I just chop my A7Xs in, you know, they're the monitors that I mix on. I've kind of, my studio, like my control room at my studio is not massive, and I've thought about kind of upgrading my monitors a couple of times recently, but then I'm like, everything that kind of looks like a reasonable upgrade tends to be going up to like just bigger speakers, and they're just going to overwhelm that room like so quickly. You know, like, I don't know, so is it the barefoot ones or
Yeah, the footprint ones.
Yeah, some of those have looked pretty good, and I've thought about, but again, it's that kind of thing where it's like, well, I can mix fine on these monitors. You know, I'm really happy with my mixes at the moment, so really, why do I need to upgrade them?
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
that's the biggest question. I think it's I think there's a lot of that. Oh, I should upgrade. It's like, well,
really,
if you're getting the results that you like, then what's the point?
What's the point? Yeah, exactly. You know, I'm never sitting there being like, oh, I wish I could hear more sub, or I don't really understand the top end. You know, I'm like, I understand these monitors like really well. Like when I first got the Adams, I was ballsing up mixes for, you know, this was a long time ago, but I went from like Yamaha MSP5s to then suddenly like A7Xs, and the tweeters are just so different. You know, like the ribbon tweeter, it just took a long time to adjust my ears, you know, 6 months to a year to really understand what was going on in the top end. And so, you know, through that experience, I'm like, well, how am I just going to be able to start mixing in a studio overnight on a new set of monitors and nail it? You know, I'll just take my own monitors and just have that kind of, you know, safety blanket behind me.
Do you ever mix on headphones or?
Yeah. You know, I've got a couple of pairs of Sennheisers. You know, I tend to use like HD 600s and 650s. Again, it was something that took a while to kind of adjust to because they're open back and, you know, they're super transparent kind of headphones. But then once it clicked, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. You know, like, yeah. And so, yeah, at home I do a lot of mixing on headphones. But then I'll take them to my studio and just do a final kind of pass in the spot that I've been mixing in for the last 7 years, you know.
I got used to 650s so quickly. Like I found them like, like as soon as I got them, I was like, oh right, these are brilliant. And like,
but that's because you're a mastering engineer, right? As well, you've got the ears for them.
They are really, really great. Because I kind of, I mean, I've never done that much on headphones really, and I was using just a pair of those K702s.
Yeah.
They're really, really good, and they're like amazing for the price. But you could sort of instantly hear that there was like, okay, they're not really heavy on the bass, so I'm gonna have to watch out for that. And like there's sort of certain compensations you have to make. Whereas as soon as I got the 650s, and especially once I got the Sonarworks for them, it's just instantly like, oh right, this is kind of rivaling my monitors here in terms of what I can hear. Yeah.
But the Sonarworks thing is a funny thing, right? Because I've never, I guess, you know, like I've always thought about doing something like that for my studio because I have sound treatment in there, but I've never actually like looked into whether or not it's completely balanced. But it is also that thing where it's a spot that I've sat and listened to music in.
Yeah, it's the same as the speakers. There's no need.
Yeah, you know, and that's kind of it. I'm a bit like, well, I know what music should sound like in this position where I'm sitting. And so as long as I mix to that, everything seems to sound fine, you know, like, yeah, okay, you know, I have some kind of like reference EQ curves that I like to not, you know, kind of, but just as I'm mixing, I'll just drop onto the master and just be like, oh, okay, yeah, you know, that mix is sitting roughly where I want it to sit, you know, especially at the end of a day when my ears are tired, maybe after 8 hours, you know, just so I don't do that thing that like I used to do when I was learning, which was like the last half hour of a day just completely fuck up a mix because I'd just be like top end, more distortion, you know, just more energy in the mix, and I come in the morning and I'll be like, oh my god, what was I doing? Like this is totally insane. Like what the hell? And so like I find that now the best way is just to drop, you know, just a visual curve over the top of it, just to be like, yeah, I know that sounded good, don't do that thing. don't do that 7.5 hours into mixing thing, which is just hype that top end.
But that definitely comes with experience, though. I mean, you can always hear, that I think the less experienced mixer, the more bottom and the more top comes through, the more scoop the mix is. Like,
Yeah, like I've really got into mid-range recently. It's so funny. It's such a nerdy shit thing. I'm really into mid-range right now. But
what exact frequencies, mate? Go on.
Well, it's been like multi-band distortion. I've got really excited by multi-band distortion, especially on drums.
No pun intended.
No, was there a joke there? I don't know.
Excited.
Oh yes, there it is. Oh God, that was that. Yeah, just leave the room. Go sit on a step and think about what you just said. No, yeah.
Hey, I'm a dad now. I'm allowed to make dad jokes.
Yeah, that was well, Dad. But yeah, multi-band distortion on drums and getting. I think I was listening to a Hawes record or something like that. One of these kind of like slightly more modern. I think people call it noise rock. Is Hawes noise? I don't know, but quite a polished. But it's this new kind of mix that seems to be quite fashionable at the moment on kind of punk, which is just like very mid-range, and especially like metal guitars as well are becoming more mid-rangey. Kind of definitely there's big old cuts going on in like the 7K kind of neck of the woods on guitars, and it's it to learn that has been a bit of a kind of readjust to what I've known. It's not something that I particularly like, but I like having it in my toolbox to understand it. When a band comes in and we're like, oh, we really like this sound of this record, and you can hear it a mile off. You're like, oh right, okay, yeah, you're going for that weird mid-range thing that seems to be there, and it's definitely like I found, especially on the drums, about driving between 200 hertz and 1.5k, something like that. And it's like if you drive there, you suddenly start to get this kind of mid-range thump on the snare drum and the kick drum that are in these mixes. And that was kind of my way of finding it. And it's pretty exciting. It's kind of nice when you stumble across something new.
So you parallel drum bussing that multiband?
Yeah, it's kind of like when I'm mixing drums, I just work in submixes all the way, and like it's definitely, I've just been working on a new Pet Brick record, and Igor was like, oh, like I'd like stems, and I was like, sure, like how do you want them? Because he wanted to just muck about with them in his studio, and he's like, I want everything. I was like, you don't want everything. I was like, you're going to have a nightmare, because the way I mix drums is just, like 2 mics on a kick, that goes into a kick bus, and then the kick bus will go into a submix bus, and then the submix, which will be like the kick and the snare together, will then go into a drum bus. And so if you're giving someone just like everything, you've got the kick drum 4 times, I think, in a mix or something like that. It can be a bit of a nightmare. But yeah, and so then I found that I'll put that multi-band distortion in one of 2 places. I'll either put it on the whole drum mix, or I'll put it on the sub, which is the kick and the snare kind of mix. Because like sometimes I'll put like just it was really fun. At one point there was a lot of people coming in with Kurt Balau's recordings, being like, I want to sound like this, and I was like, okay. And he has a real unique thing. Like I there was a point in time where I was like so excited by his mixes. I was like, this guy just nails it. There's so much energy in these mixes. They sound raw, but they're tight, and they kind of had everything. And so I really went down a hole with like, how does Kurt kind of mix, and how does he get these kind of sounds? And I managed to get hold of the impulse responses for his studio. And I started using his live room impulse on the drum mix. And you're like, that's his drum sound. It's his room. It's not his mics. It's not his mixing. He has a really specific sound in live room. And it was amazing. It was literally, you just started to kind of blend in that impulse on the kick and the snare. And you're like, shit, that's Kurt's drum sound. There it is. Like, it's kind of great when something like that clicks, and then, you start to realize like so much with drum sounds. So it's not the mics, tuning has got something to do with it. Playing's got a lot to do with it. The room has got everything to do with it, you know.
So is your live room, have you kind of over the years kind of learned what that sound is and how
Yeah,
to
like
manipulate
my
it?
room's kind of funny because it's like I do a lot of live recording, so I keep it really dead. It's not a lively room because like when I go and record like at Giant Wafer or something like that where they have a really bright sounding live room, if you want to record live, it's a nightmare. It is so hard because it gets so loud so quickly because it's just really just like you know.
Yeah.
And you know, people are just overwhelmed and everyone's just turning stuff up to try and hear themselves, and before you know it, it's just like too much. So when I was kind of designing my studio, I was like, just keep it not completely dead, but keep it dry, you know, and that'll be cool. And then really I just spent a lot of time getting good with reverbs on room mics basically. So I have 2 room mics and I put reverb on those room mics. So like an impulse of, you know, and I've got a few that I use that I find work really well. And yeah, like, well, not fake it, but pretty much fake it. Enhance it, definitely, with a bigger, you know, so I've got a pair of rooms, so it's got that kind of distance, you know. But then just start to bring out a bigger sounding thing, and then just use something like Devil Lock or, you know, one of those kind of real nasty distortions on it, and I'm just like, sounds like live drums to me.
That Devil Lock on a room mic is just...
It's killer, right?
Oh, it's like a pint of milk. It's great.
Yeah. Like, I definitely find you got to be careful with the top end, man. Like, cymbals...
The darkness thing is like...
It's essential, isn't it? Yeah.
Such a extreme version of compression. It's great.
Yeah, like, the studio that I use has a couple... Like, the one in Wales that I use has a couple of the real... The Shure... What are they called? I can't remember what they're called, but something lock, not Devil Lock.
Yeah,
But
it was a church compressor, wasn't it? That's what
it was a PA compressor. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what it was. Yeah, just for, you know, terrible sound. But yeah, just absolutely like destroys everything. But amazing on a room mic. Yeah, like, you know. And so that's kind of a bit of like how my drum mix works in my studio, you know.
Well, I guess with the budgets that a lot of people, that most of us are working with, it's certainly a lot easier to make a room dead and sort of introduce that stuff later than to try and make a live room that just, that has it all there.
Yeah, well, I think your studio setup's got to be way more complicated if you go for a really lively room. You know, you need you need ISO boosts, and you need, you know, ways of being able to separate. Like, the one thing that I hate is I hate having to ask bands to wear headphones. Like, that's my thing. It's the vibe killer. That's when stuff starts going wrong because people are like, I can't hear that nuance that I could hear, and then you know, like, everyone hears everything differently. You know, when they're standing in a room, you know, you can focus in and out when it's a 3-dimensional sound of a band playing. When you're in headphones, you can't do that. It just doesn't work. And so really that was it for me. When I set my studio up in London, I was like, what do I want? What, you know, being in a punk band, what do I want to be able to do? I want to be able to go and turn up in a room, literally within a couple of hours, be doing live takes. That was it. And, you know, not be like, I can't hear things, I'm getting in a pickle. And it's like, well, what do I need to achieve that? Is that I need a controlled live room. You know, that's what I need. And that's kind of, you know, it does pretty good, you know, like all the USA Nails records and stuff like that. They're all just recorded live in that room, no headphones, no clicks, nothing like that, you know, and it sounds pretty good to me. So, yeah, you know.
Are you doing vocals separate or doing that?
Oh, yeah, I tend to do that separate. You know, like the main reason I don't record it live, like some people have tried to do it live, is that I'm like, your voice is going to be tired. You're going to burn your voice out. You know, like, because if you don't get the music take in the first 2, you're going to be on 3 or 4 takes of a song. The energy is going to be going by the end of it. So that's how I explain it to a band. I'm like, you can do it, but is your voice going to last for 8 hours? Probably not. Like, it's unlikely. And it's the same, even the same with like when people are like, oh, we want guide vocals whilst we're tracking. And so I might set up a mic in the control room with me or something like that and be like, look, just sing along, but then it's like, if the takes are, if it's going on and on and on, we're not getting this take, I'm like, please just sing the cue, because when we come to do vocals in 2 days time, you're not going to have a voice left. You're going to burn your voice out on these guide vocals, like, just, and that's it. Vocals is the hardest thing to record. Like, I that's the thing that because it's so much about personality. Once I've worked with a vocalist a couple of times, I find it's much easier. But that first time I'm working with someone, how do you want to do it? How long does your voice last? When do you get tired? What's the stuff that you struggle with? All of those questions. And it's kind of difficult because you want a vocalist to be in the best mood possible. You don't want to put them in a downer. So I find that it's really, a bit of a balancing act where you've got to keep the energy up, you've got to keep them happy, you've got to keep them excited, especially with a lot of the heavy punk stuff that I do, and yeah, just learning the way that someone records vocals, and that limit, that cliff edge where you're just like, oh, we're done, like, just stop, because if you keep trying, it's not going to get any better, that kind of stuff. Whose dog's that?
Yeah, where's the bloody dog, man?
Yeah.
Where's the bloody dog?
Yeah.
The postman's here.
Amazing. But yeah, recording vocals is a trick. And then I find that once I've done it a couple of times with someone, we have a good dialogue, and it can just be a lot easier,
Noise bands' vocals are very different to a pop band's vocal. Trying to get them to do something. What do you want to talk about some of the process? Because I'm sure they're very different to.
Yeah, like do I say this or not? Because people will know this now. But I tend to trick, like, noise rock vocalists. I'm like, go and just do a run through, just because I want to hear the whole album. I want to hear all of the vocals. Just go and start, and then I'll keep 80% of it. They'll nail it, because they just think that they're doing a run through, and so they won't get stressed about it. They'll just whiz through it all. It'll be like, usually, I think 2 or 3 records that are kind of quite notable. The first, oh dear, Wayne, you released their album as well on your label. That were Pale Horse, and they're no longer Pale Horse. They are called Remote Viewing. There you go. Yeah, so Nikolai was just like, we were working on the first Remote Viewing album, and he was getting really nervous about doing vocals, and I was really surprised, because I was like, nah, you're not going to be nervous. But yeah, he was really kind of like quite like spooked out by the whole thing. And I was like, hey, look, here's an SM57. I would just want to hear the whole record. And I think we got the whole album in one take, just everything.
Incredible.
And you're just like, yeah, amazing. There you go. And also the other one that was like that was the I'm gonna forget this one now as well, because I just forgot the last one. No, Lower Slaughter. The first Lower Slaughter album, Sinead's vocals on that was literally just one take all the way through. And
those vocals are so good as well.
They're amazing. Like, it really was just like, yeah, let's just do the next song. Sinead sounding amazing. Just keep going. But when you get that kind of energy running and someone's just nailing it, it's so exciting, because usually you're like, yes, I'm gonna gain a day here to do some more mixing because I had it put aside for vocals, but also it's just great because it can be like so stressful.
Well, yeah, I mean, vocals are so different to every other instrument in that it's like the most exposing thing you can do musically.
It's just personality, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
It's everyone's personality and what they're looking for. So yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, I mean, you talked about like the differences between being, between recording, vocals for kind of noise rock bands and stuff and vocals for more kind of melodic poppy stuff. But, for all their differences, I still think it's just the same. It's like an absolute kind of raw exposing of your personality that's coming out of your mouth, no matter what style you're singing in.
Yeah, it is. Although, like, when I did the very first Voden album, and that was like really early on, and that was because I've been recording like 7 years, I think, something like that, probably from the first time I actually, started to go, oh yeah, I can actually charge for this. It's not just me mucking around, and the first Voden album was something that I did, and Shan is just off the hook. She is. I learned so much off of recording her at that point. Like, it was just incredible watching someone who just records, who's just a vocalist and is amazing. And also someone else that I learned a lot of was I did the last Mongol Horde stuff, which is like Frank Turner's punk band. And like he was just great, just someone that's got a lot of studio experience, knows the limits of his voice, knows how to get something out of his voice, and you just like, I can learn so much off of these, and then just kind of share that knowledge with people that don't see themselves as singers. They're like, I'm a singer in a band, but I'm not a singer. You're like, yeah. And so, like, I know what you mean. It is the same, but there is a difference, I think, where it's like when you have someone that is like professional.
Yeah, I get
and it's like that the couple of times that I've done that, and I did it as well. I ended up recording some drums from like the drummer from Stereophonics or something like that. He's just a session dude. Like, he wasn't the best drummer in the world, but he had this skill set that I hadn't come across before, because I recorded him maybe 4 years ago, something like that, where he just came in, he was like, yeah, play the track, and he just, yeah, there you go, there's one take. He's like, I'm gonna do another one, I'll try a few other things, third one, yeah, everything was perfect. You're just like, not flustered, no mistakes, nothing, and that's the same, I think, like with the, I love what, my heart and soul is in DIY and punk bands, and the noisier end of the stuff. This isn't stuff that I get to record very often, and I can imagine it probably becomes quite boring after a while if you're just recording session drums and kind of pop singers and whatever. But for me, it was a kind of fascinating little insight into like, well, I can take some of this knowledge and kind of give this to these people, and especially with vocals, I'm like, look, you own it. This is you. If you're not happy, you just stop and be like, yo, Wayne, I want to go back a few lines, and we'll just pick up, and you guide me, and that's when it'll work. And that's what I found with vocals, is just like giving it to the vocalist. I'm not going to tell them what to do, because it's not my song, it's not my voice, it's the vocalist thing. And once you build up that relationship, it's amazing, and give the vocalist that confidence that it's like, they know best. They do know best. They know when their voice is feeling good. They know when they've nailed a line. They know when it's acceptable and when it's not, it's, I'm just there to kind of get that out of them. And so those kind of, those people that I recorded that, just live in studios, just record like all the time. You just like, yeah, you have a skill set that is, enables me to record you really well. Yeah. I think that's probably the best way to put it.
Yeah, it's really interesting you're talking about like, being, because obviously your background is, the sort of noisier kind of DIY punk kind of stuff. And you talked about setting up your studio with that in mind, with having like a live room and stuff like that. And obviously you've become like, you as a producer and Bare Bites Horse as a studio has become very much like a go-to for like the sort of specifically the London DIY scene, but also like the country and stuff like that. How much work are you still doing in that kind of world, or have you now started to kind of get more work outside of that world?
It's difficult to say really. Like, I feel as though like I'm growing with the bands that I'm recording.
Yeah,
I think
that makes sense.
That's probably the easiest. Yeah, like I've just done the end of last year. I just did like the new John album and the new Green Lung album. Both of those albums, like the Green Lung one, like if that band has sold so many records, like I think it was 10,000, something like that, you know.
Wow.
And you're like, how have you sold that many records? Like, who sells that many records now? You know, and so everyone's quite excited about this next record. And like, I had to get vetted by the record label,
Wow.
whether or not they deemed I was high profile enough, I think. Yeah, well, because, you know, they've got a hell of a budget, you know, and the label were like, yeah, we'll put some money in, you know, to, yeah, you know, there was a budget, which is rare for the stuff that I do. And so, yeah, you know, it's really nice that those bands have stuck with me as well, and haven't just been like, oh yeah, no, we're going to go and work with some fancy name to put on the record or whatever. They're like, no, we like what Wayne does and we have a good relationship with him. Like, you know, I'm under no illusion that at some point those bands are going to be like, well, we're going to go and try and record with someone else, just because who wants to record 5 records with the same person? Well,
Yeah, totally.
you know, USA Nails have done 5 with me, I think, something like that, but they're just freaks anyway. But do you know what I mean? It's like, I'm always looking for new bands to work with as well, and that's the first thing I'm going to do after this lockdown. I'm going to get out to some gigs. I'm going to find out, you know, I think the music scene is going to change in London. I think we're going to have lost some of the bands that have been around for a long time. People have had kids, people's lives, people have moved away, you know. And so, yeah, I'm just going to get out and about and see what's new and, you know, kind of, yeah, just try and find some new stuff to work with, and not like find that new young band, but, you know, just be like, there's got to be like some new exciting music going on that I feel as though I could help out.
So when you talked about bands growing and you kind of growing with the bands, do you find that their material starts to change? Because it's one thing that I've, or not change, but it's one thing I've always been fascinated by is bands who sort of take that next step and start playing to much bigger audiences.
Yeah.
Whether some bands consciously go, right, okay, our material now has to play to 1,000 people rather than 200. Do you find that as you work? Have you found that with certain bands over a few albums or whatever?
Like Green Long, just, you know, this new album that we've just recorded is a classic rock album, and we laughed about it a lot. We're like, we're going to try and sneak this classic rock album in as a stoner album. That's the key, you know what I mean? Because, you know, that's you know, the weird thing about like stoner and stuff like that is that, you know, you're appealing to the older generation of people that have got money to buy vinyl, you know, and 30 quid vinyl as well, you know, not, you know, reissues and stuff like that. You know, that's the crowd that buy those records, and, you know, there's a knowingness there that you're like, but it's not a compromise. I would definitely like this next, what I hope, and, you know, like the reason that they wanted to work with me, they were like, if we go and work with a big rock producer, this is going to turn into a rock album. If we do it with Wayne, it's going to keep that edge to it. You know what I mean? It's that, you know, and so I'm constantly trying to keep them in check. I'm like, guys, the sax solo, I don't know. You know, like, I'm like, it's cool, and I'm like absolutely pissing myself. I think it's the funniest thing in the world, but have we just crossed that line? You know what I mean? Like,
I need to hear this.
You do need to hear this album, man. Like, it's insane. It's like, I think it's this last track on the album's got a sax solo, it's got clarinet, it's got Rhodes. It's, you know, like, I was getting up to 270, 280 channels in a mix, you know, like, it was huge. You know, all of Scott's solos are like, one of them had 9 harmonies. I was like, how do you do that? Can you do 9 harmonies? Is that even a thing? Like, you know, like, what is going on? You know, yeah, it's just a complete, like, the most audacious record, but it's a hoot. It's really good fun, you know, and so, like, yeah, in a way, yeah, like, yeah, they're not just this crusty stoner band anymore, but I think it's a band that they've always wanted to be as well. Yeah. But maybe that's just age saying that. I think every old person, I always wanted to write classic rock, but
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Like, yeah, but like I've seen, you know, like bands that I've worked with for a long time, like USA Nails are probably the band that I've worked with the longest, and they've just got weirder and more
That's true. Yeah.
more obnoxious and shorter songs. And I swear that Steve is just trying to write himself out of the band so he could just move up north. I think, you know, he's like, I don't want to sing on this one. And then just looks around the room and everyone's like, oh shit, okay, who's singing? And Gareth's like, oh, I guess I'll sing. And then he's like, I'm not playing guitar on this one either. I don't want to. Like, okay, Steve, fine. And he's like, I'm moving. I think he's moved now as well. I think he's left London. So that's, you know, there's going to be a real shift in London, I think, after this. Like, I don't know, like, I was working like 7 days a week over the last couple of years. Obviously, like, you know, even at the end of last year, because I was playing catch up on my work over summer, you know, I'm quite happy if I don't go back to being as busy as I was. I'll be quite content with that.
Well, I counted, actually. I did a bit of research, and in 2020, the year where, you know, people were sort of going, where people were struggling to do anything from the moment they woke up to the moment they went to bed, you were involved in...
I don't want to know.
I count 50 things that came out. Yeah, so nearly one a week.
Yeah. It doesn't surprise me.
I did a little bit of research. That's 8 records that you actually played on. 32 that you recorded and mixed.
Yeah,
and 10 that you released as part of Hominid.
Really? Well, there you go.
That's 50 records, man.
That's all right. I'll take that. That's a good year. But yeah, I think, you know, I think like 2019, it was like over 100 records that I recorded. It was an insane amount of work, you know. I was, you know, and I was like, oh, I'm tired, but you know, but it felt good, you know, and that was the thing, you know. But I don't know. I'm kind of you know, when the work's there, you take it, and that was the thing with London, especially like right up to this like pandemic. The quality of music is so high. You know, I might have 1 or 2 bad albums a year where I'm like, oh, you know, guys, don't put my name on this record. You know, just when there's a mismatch with producer and band or whatever, you know. But there's just so much good music knocking around, and yes, I feel privileged to be bang in the middle of all of it. It's a cool thing, you know. I think if I decided to stop recording tomorrow, I'd be pretty proud of everything that I've done, you know, and kind of I'd be like, I think I brought something to the table over the last few years.
How do you manage that much work? How are you managing 32 records that you've mixed yourself?
Don't know. Just do it. Just do you know what though? Like I'm completely. Workaholic is probably the simplest way to describe it, but you know, for instance, like this we're working on a Pet Brick record at the moment, and we did 8 days. Like with that project, we don't write music and then go and record. We write and record. It's, you know, kind of weird industrial music. We did 8 days just after Christmas on it, and I think we got up to about 85 minutes of music. You know, it was just like an insane amount of music. And then we kind of came away, we're like, oh god, what have we done? We've done a double album or something like this. Like, is it any good? And so then we sent it to the label, Rocket. We were like, look, just can you have a listen and just tell us what we've done? Like, we're not sure if it's good, or we're not sure if we just have no idea what it is. And then during that time, I think I've written 5 or 6 more songs, you know, just because my brain is just constant, you know. And I think I'm going to have about 5 or 6 releases this year. You know, there's a Big Lad album, there's a Pet Brick album, there's another collab that's kind of bubbling under at the moment, which is like Pet Brick, Deaf Kids, Doomer, which is this kind of band from Nega Nega tapes. So it's like weird black metal, but I didn't say to kind of explain what it is. And then this noise guy from Switzerland, I think. So yeah, like there's that collab. Then I've done a Johnny Broke album. I've done an ambient album. I just sit at home just doing music all the time. That's it, really. I just don't know, my brain just keeps going. It does. And then, yeah, you know, it's just, yeah.
I want us to talk a little bit about Pet Brick, actually.
Sure.
Because, so, obviously, I mean, I don't live in London. And obviously, I'm familiar with the scene, you know, to a degree. But, so, when I was growing up, like, Chaos AD is literally one of my favourite records of all time, right?
Yeah. And me too as well.
And,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden,
Yeah.
like, Igor shows up playing with you and not looking a day older than he did in 1994. Like,
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
How did that even come about? I didn't even know he lived in London.
Yeah, like he's been in London about 7 years now, I think. 6 years, 7 years, something like that. And, you know, like obviously he left Sepultura mid 2000s, I think. And then he went off and did this project called Mix Hell with his wife, which is just like electro kind of with him playing the drums. He just really got into the dance scene. He was around like Boys Noise Records and, you know, that French house thing that kind of was a big kind of mid 2000, you know, late 2000 kind of vibe. And so, yeah, and then he ended up playing drums in Soul Wax. You know,
oh yeah, of course, and
because
with
Blake's his drum tech. And so I think it was that thing where he was getting busier and busier with Soul Wax, and then Cavalera started to do stuff with like Roots. You know, him and his brother were going back over the old Sepultura records, and they were like, "It's really expensive to be flying all over the place from Sao Paulo. Like, we should probably move somewhere where it's a bit easier and cheaper to get around from." And so they chose London. And then he just happened to be at a Big Lad gig at the Underworld when, like, we got a mutual friend from, because he was really into, like, he kind of likes weird electronic music, you know, and so we had a mutual friend through breakcore kind of stuff. And just, you know, I just got an email about 4 years ago just being like, "Hey, I saw your band, I really like it, Igor Cavalera." And my brain was like I was like, what just happened? Like, oh my God. And so then just emailed him back, was like, "Oh yeah, cool, man, like that's great, nice one." Like, and we just chatted a bit and just swapped some music, but we didn't do anything for like a long, you know, we just stayed in touch for a couple of years. And then I saw he was mucking around with some like modular synth stuff online, and I kind of just was like, "Oh, yo, if you've got this module, like check out this firmware." And he was like, "Oh, dude, you know, I'd love it if you come around and just show me a bit more stuff with, you know, I'm just getting into the modular thing." And I was like, "Well, I've got a studio, like come over, bring some stuff and we'll, you know, just hang out." And he turned up and I drank about 4 cups of coffee because I was kind of so like excited. And then it was like, "Go and play a D beat, go and play the drums." And he'd drunk as much coffee as well. He was like, "Yeah, all right." And so we kind of just like both like this in my studio, and we wrote about 3 songs in the first day, and we were like, "Whoa, that's pretty good," you know, like there's something in this kind of, you know, because I was concerned it was going to sound too much like Big Lad because it's like electronic and drums, and you know, I was a bit like, "Oh God, I don't want people to be like, oh, Wayne's just replaced Henry for Igor." Like, what a dick move. But then, you know, I was like, no, this is sounding like really different. And so he'd just got a bit of downtime in the UK at that point where he wasn't doing anything with Soul Wax. And so I just carved out some days. I was like, "Look, just come back and we'll just keep writing some stuff." And so we did like something every week for maybe a couple of months, and that was like the first EP that we put together. And then we put that out, and then yeah, you know, I was like, "Well, this is cool, people are into it." And then we were like, "Should we do an album?" And we were like, "Yeah, fuck it, why not, let's do a record," you know. And then I think Uniform were in London and had asked Igor, they were like, "Yo, you know, do you want to come and DJ or something like that?" And he kind of came to me and he was like, "Should we do this live?" I was like, "Yeah, fuck it, why not?" You know, like, let's give it a go. And that was kind of the start of it, really. And then, you know, I didn't realize it, I think we're on our 6th record, something like that, you know, like already in like 2 years, you know, like, well, not record, but like, you know, we've done the EP, we did the album, we did the Deaf Kids collab album. We did the Pet Sounds kind of EP that just came out, and now we're doing like a double album. So yeah, you know, there's a lot. Yeah, we've produced a lot. We've been really like productive, and yeah, it's fun, man. He's the loveliest dude. You know, it's pretty wild to be doing music with him, and that's also why I'm really critical of people that do double kick, because I get to be in a band. I get to be in a band with Igor. You know, dude's a machine.
I've stood at the sides of the stage watching him support Motorhead once, and I just couldn't believe the man's like.
Yeah,
it's so strange when you can see someone actually do it correctly.
Yeah, dude. It is. It's kind of fascinating, and his technique is pretty unique. Like it is, because he uses like 2 Bs upside down. You're like, what? Are you just like using these like baseball bats as drumsticks? Yeah. But you know, and he's like, but you know, it's how the drums sound good. You know, like you can't be playing heavy music with like light sticks, and it's true. You know, if you play heavy music with heavy sticks, it sounds massive. You know, like it really does. And so yeah, you know, just like working with him, I've learned a lot about, you know, recording drums, metal drums, but he's also, again, he fits in that character. He's a punk drummer. He's not a metal drummer. Like, you know, that was something that kind of I realized quite early on. I was expecting him to come in and have this like big, massive drum kit and be like, no, it's got to be perfect. I think the first time I recorded drums with him, it had been snowing, and he turned up in moon boots. And like we put this like 20-year-old like double kick drum pedal that I bought when I was a kid, like down here. I was like, dude, it's a bit shit. He's like, it's fine. And we recorded it. I'm like, you still got your moon boots on? He's like, yeah. I'm like, amazing. Okay, great. You know, like, and you know, it's just like what works. You know, it is
bloody boots. I had to do that character.
Yeah, well, that's a good one.
Jesus.
You know.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1-1. Going back to what you were saying before about like sort of the point where punk and metal collide. It's only as an adult I think I've really realized this, that the music that I was listening to when I was, say, 13, 14, 15, in that kind of like 1993 to 95 kind of time, I think has completely informed so much in my life. Not necessarily just the like just musically, but like my political leanings and stuff like that, because like that's the age where you're the most influential. And like I didn't really care about, I don't know, I mean, I like Guns N' Roses, but I didn't really care about them that much. But like Sepultura and Napalm Death and bands like that, who were like not only amazing but also like super politically engaged, and you know, singing about, you know, police brutality and anti-establishment stuff, and like all of the kind of grindcore stuff that just couldn't give a shit about writing songs about the devil and Satan and demons and stuff. Like it's a really amazing movement. Have you seen that documentary, that Slave to the Grind documentary?
No, I haven't. A lot of people have mentioned it, and a lot of people are like, you got to watch it.
It's really great. Yeah, and it talks about this exact thing, like this kind of collision. Yeah,
it's funny. Like someone that I've met recently is a producer called Russ Russell. I don't know if you are aware of this guy, but he records all the Napalm stuff now. Basically, I think he has done for like 20 years, you know. And we just we've done a weird breakcore record together, kind of lockdown breakcore record, because he produces a lot of the kind of. There's a lot of Shane stuff from Napalm, the weird stuff. Russ is behind a lot of that kind of thing. And I met him through Big Lad as well. He kind of came to a Big Lad show, and he was like, oh, the band's great. And I was like, oh yeah, cool. You know, thanks. He's like, who records your stuff? I was like, oh, I do. He's like, oh yeah, sweet. You know, I'm a producer as well. I was like, oh, you know, like what you working on? He's like, oh, new Napalm. I was like, I know who you are. But he's been amazing, you know, like I've kind of picked him up as a bit of a kind of, I don't want to say mentor, he's a friend, but he's someone that is just further down the line in his career, and has just helped me out, you know, kind of navigate a few decisions, you know, business decisions, points, and all of that kind of business, right? When you start asking for writing credits on stuff, you know, that kind of stuff that can be tricky to talk about with DIY bands, and you know, like how do you do that stuff? And so he's been great to kind of help me navigate that. But you know, like you know, his production chops are amazing. They're so good. They're brutal. They're different to mine. But that makes that relationship cool because, you know, I think he just mixed like the new Machine Head song, and the reason they like chose Russ was because they were like, yeah, man, your stuff's raw. And I was like, dude, your stuff is not raw.
My stuff's raw.
Yeah, my stuff's raw. Your stuff is not raw. you're overproduced. And we were kind of, you know, kind of have a nice relationship like that. It's it's really kind of handy to have someone like that. But yeah, you know, again, but understands it because he comes from grindcore and that kind of world. You know, it's really cool to have someone like that just on the end of a message. You know, just be like, yo, dude, like, check this out. Like, what do you think? Give us a hand.
Yeah, I think we're all very lucky to have grown up on Dead Kennedys records or whatever, aren't we? Because
the Tony Hawk 2 soundtrack.
I think that might be
Police Truck
Patriots for some people. Yeah,
it was Police Truck. I remember it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Can I? One thing that drives me mad is just quick side point, right? If any drummers are listening to this right now, don't come into my studio covered in GoPro cameras with like, seriously, concentrate on the drumming. Like, the amount of drummers that are like, I'm just going to film myself. I'm like,
just drummers as well. What's that like?
It's just weird, right? Literally, I had one drummer turn it. He's like, I'm just going to stick a light up so I can film myself. And I was like, mixed out, yeah, do what you want, fine, whatever. I went into my live room and he brought two proper, like, film, like, massive, like, fold out, I don't even know, like, photography studio lights. And I was like, drummers, man, what is it? You know, I blame like Ben Collar for doing that kind of GoPro one where he played that Converge song and it was like totally insane. You know, I'm like, yeah, it's amazing.
There you
go. Sorry.
I just blame this, like the constant kind of pressure for content, because that's all that people are doing, isn't it?
Yeah,
just,
man. But it's so funny that like, oh, going to record an album. I'll do 6 hours of content.
Yeah.
Can we just get a better drum take?
You shouldn't be thinking about it, should you?
No. It's dead funny.
Is it getting in the way? Is that become like a thing that you found?
It definitely did at one point. I think I've kind of nipped it in the bud now. I think most people know not to come in with one. I don't mind it, but it is that funny thing when it's just like, you know, I'll be looking at a drummer, I'm like, what is strapped to their forehead? And you go in and there's a GoPro camera just like bunk in the middle of the head. You're like, oh, guys, like, you know, you got one there, you got one on your chest, you got one on your arms. You know, oh, God, no. Just play the damn drums. Right, guys, I'm going to have to go because I've got to go to the post office before it shuts. Man. See you guys. Thank you so much for the chat.
Thank you, Wayne.
My brain is totally buzzing now. Do you know what I mean? I'm going to go and write loads of music and record like 10 albums in a day.
Inspired.
Yeah, take care, guys.
Yeah, thanks a lot, mate.
Yeah.
See you soon.
Bye-bye. How do I leave?
Press leave.
No, leave.